So when I tell people that I'm a sex coach, I get a lot of questions pretty immediately. I don't know if the assumption is that I grew up with parents who were like nudists and polyamorous, or that I grew up in like a convent somewhere. I'm not sure where their ideas are, but I actually had a pretty like middle of the ground upbringing. I had casual Catholic parents. My grandparents are immigrants on both sides, so neither me nor my parents had the talk. So my upbringing around sexuality was a lot like it is for most people. My private parts were only for me, and sex felt very serious. We also were just absolutely not going to talk about it unless you had sex before you got married, and then you got to let somebody know. When I reached my late 20s, I was introduced to the world of sex education through a sex coach named Dolly Josette. And she taught me that our bodies are beautiful and magical things, and each part functions with each other in this perfect synchronized dance so that we could experience the world with all of our senses. I felt like my entire world had changed, as you can imagine, because I'm standing on this stage right now. The door had been blown wide open for me. I couldn't believe that there were women who had such shameless, sensual energy, and they still had the respect of the people around them. I also couldn't believe how little I knew about my own body. I was 27 years old, and I just found out the difference between a vulva and a vagina. I was like unstoppable. And I felt this deep curiosity and courage and confidence that just rippled out into the rest of my life. And I felt very present. I was just looking for opportunities to experience all kinds of pleasure in all areas of my life. When we think about it, vulva owners have spent all of eternity trying to prove that we were worthy of all of the pleasures in life. Having a well-paying job, an opinion, a spot in the office, having a childless home, or even like having a home at all, these were all things that we really had to fight for. We are constantly at the risk of being accused of being too pushy or too bossy or too sexual or a tease. And this is all the result of a really deeply rooted system, and it's very connected to our historical experience, so we'll go through some of those points today. I aim to validate some of your experiences, add more color to the feminine experience as a whole, and honor the call to the divine feminine energy that we all feel. So, if you don't mind, we're going to start at the beginning, the Bible. I'm sure you're mostly familiar with the story of Adam and Eve, which starts human existence with the choice of a woman creating original sin for the rest of us. After that, we have a virgin pregnancy, and culturally, we call that the Immaculate Conception, and she's praised for this purity and innocence while also having had a child. Skip forward a couple hundred years, and we're at the Middle Ages. And I'd like to quote Professor John Studd. In medieval times, people feared three things: the devil, hunger, and women, which, very dramatic, if you ask me. I think that's kind of a lot. This also was the period of time where we see witch hunting begin. There's a book called Malleus Maleficarum. This came out in 1487, and this was the church's full guide to witch hunting. In this book, there are tons of ways that you can accuse a woman of being a witch. Some of them include miscarrying a child, flirting with someone who was not her husband, or swaying a man's mind. And these women were at the risk of being stoned to death or any other sort of inhumane practices. Pam Grossman wrote in Waking the Witch, "Female delight and female desire are so often demonized. We call witch any woman who wants." Jumping forward to the 19th century, there is a doctor who began experiments on enslaved black women. These were often life-threatening and extremely painful. He was doing them without anesthesia. And the three women that are most documented in these experiments are Anarcha, Betsy, and Lucy, and they are now revered as the mothers of gynecology today. There was also a widespread belief in the 19th century that women's sexuality and menstruation also affected their intellect, and we can see some of that in the way that the hysteria conversation came to be. So hysteria, the word, is actually has a Greek root, and that word means uterus. And this diagnosis had symptoms that, when we look at them, are essentially just symptoms that we all know are like period symptoms. This is what happens every month for most of us. And a lot of them are kind of just up to interpretation. The diagnosis of hysteria was also almost exclusively given to white women because Black women and indigenous women were seen as being savage in comparison to more civilized white women. And so this is one of many examples that we can see throughout time where the experiences of women of color have also led to different diagnoses and being pathologized as a result. And that is also part of the healthcare that they unfortunately still receive today. Folks of the 19th century also had some choice thoughts on masturbation, believing that it could lead to a litany of things, including epilepsy, coma, convulsions, death, depression, and insanity. And I always thought that that was interesting because masturbation typically happens alone and in private, intimate settings. And so these women are learning that something that is private and intimate could lead to an illness, and they could be publicly shamed as a result. And we know now that anytime we're experiencing states of pleasure and joy, our brain creates nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a neurotransmitter that helps balance other ones like dopamine and serotonin. So it does quite the opposite of what was being described. At the end of the century, doctors and academics alike spoke of menstruation making women unworthy of higher education and incapable of hard work due to the blood moving from the brain to the uterus. These were well-renowned, distinguished doctors. They were leaders of their fields. And the mistakes that they were making were permanent to some of their patients, and they were lethal to some others. And we still see the impact of those decisions even today. Insist on your health, insist on an accurate diagnosis, and insist on making choices for your body. The patriarchy has spent an eternity telling our stories for us and manipulating them the way that they see fit. We're only in 1847. And we can see how this cycle of shame started and how it still perpetuates today. Okay, the 20th century is going to be speed round, if you don't mind. In 1920, Sigmund Freud had declared that the clitoral orgasm was immature. We now know that less than 20% of women can orgasm without it. In 1948, the Gray's Anatomy, the anatomical book, not the TV show with McSteamy, was published without any mention of the clitoris at all. In 1951, Henrietta Lacks her cervix cells were taken without her consent. They were tested and they were used for research because they had found cervical cancer. Those cells earned researchers millions of dollars, and her family didn't know about it until 20 years after she'd passed. There were extremely controversial studies that Alfred Kinsey and his team had done in 1953. These studies included premarital sex, orgasm, infidelity. And in 1969, Masters and Johnson had also started some sex research that gave us crucial psychophysiological information about sex that led to us being able to treat sexual dysfunctions for the very first time. And yet, it was 2005 when Helen O'Connell, a urologist, had mapped the entire clitoral structure and published it for the very first time. Women, through time, have conquered so much. That it doesn't really shock me to think that we've really drifted from thinking that our sensuality and our femininity can be a huge source of power for us. We've been given the idea that pleasure is not ours, and it's not ours to enjoy, but it's also something that can be incredibly unsafe for us. Did you know that your cherry popping is completely a myth? Your hymen is made out of skin similar to the skin of your earlobe, and it stretches, so there's nothing to really pop. It might tear, but it very rarely, if ever, breaks. I remember learning this in high school and thinking, if you didn't bleed when you had sex for the first time, like everyone's gonna think you lied about being a virgin. And this was a huge source of stress for me when I was in high school. And now I think about it, and it kind of makes sense because the health class that I had one lesson on sex education, and this is what it was giving. We focus so much on prevention. Pleasure is completely left out of the entire conversation. So we go out into the world not knowing what to ask for because we ourselves have no idea. We just don't know. Claire Cavanaugh, the co-founder of Babeland, said that women learn to compromise before they learn to come. It all starts with some self-discovery, which you can do at home and not here. I encourage you to take a mirror below the belt and take a look. Did you know that the vulva becomes erect the same way that a penis does? It fills with blood, it swells, and it changes color. So if you're taking a look, you might see shades of purple, shades of red and pink. And as the vulva swells, it kind of opens up like the petals of a flower. It's really beautiful, actually. We deserve to have nourishing experiences where our needs and wants are honored and they're heard, instead of being silenced for the comfort of others. We should feel comfortable saying, I love when you do that, or you know what would feel amazing? Once we can reclaim our sensuality and our bodies, we can invite other people into our universe in a whole new way. Sherry Winston, a sex educator, talks about how not knowing how to use our own bodies is kind of like not knowing most of the piano keys. You can definitely play some music, but you definitely can't make Mozart, and neither can your partner. So I want to encourage you and push you to play and to push past any discomfort that you've had in the past and start this sensual awakening for yourself. And when you do, you will radiate with the knowledge of the power that you hold in your own sensuality. And when you can embrace it and have this passionate, electrifying side of you, you'll be able to design new parts of your destiny. And when you choose to live it, you will be amazed at the things that just start kind of falling into place. Your body is the only one that you have, and it is your right and responsibility to advocate for it. And skepticism and pleasure are essential parts of that. Insist on being seen, insist on your wants and your needs, and insist on making choices for your own body. It starts with reclaiming what was once shameful and making it now our irrevocable power. Thank you.